All right, folks, welcome to Omega Man Radio. Tonight is a special broadcast. I know you've been waiting for it. The night has finally arrived. We're going to have Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, Chris Putnam on tonight. We're talking about Petrus Romanus, the final pope in the Annunciation of the Antichrist.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's broadcast. This is a time vaulted or opening of a time lock for information that has been kept, if you will, secret, hidden, almost to the point where now it can be told, now it can be spoken, and I'll let Tom and Chris address that. My name is Steve Quayle. I'm going to moderate, but the experts tonight are Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. We're going to bring Chris on first. Is some of the information that I believe Daniel was showing, the whole end-time panorama of how everything plays out. If there's anything that's important, ladies and gentlemen, it's to understand the nature of the battle, the players in the battle, and how this will affect the lives of almost, just in the United States alone, 70 million Catholics, but also it's going to affect everybody on the planet. So we're going to bring on this topic. And by the way, you're going to hear from the two co-authors of the book that they've just written. The final pope is here, Petrus Romanus.
We were, been talking about prophecy and some of the things we were going back and forth, and we both got on this topic of the prophecy of the popes. And the thing that you just can't get around with the prophecy of the popes is that the next pope's the last one. I mean, that is a fact, whether it's a real prophecy, whether you buy it or not. The fact of the matter is a lot of people do buy it, and there's only one left, one way or the other. We're going to find out if it's true or not. It's so time sensitive that if we don't get this book out by April, no one's going to believe us, because if it happens the way it's predicted, we need to get the book in print as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But I'm going to let Tom talk a little bit about what he's been doing with it, and we can talk more about those specifics and more about what I uncovered on the research of the prophecy as we go tonight.
Chris, before you pass the torch, give out your website, please, and contact info.
Okay, it's logosapologia.org. So www.logosapologia.org.
Awesome. Tom, take it over.
Yeah, hey, great to be on with all of you guys tonight. And Steve, great to be on with you again, too. And Chris, this is a wonderful opportunity, always, of course, a privilege to be on the radio with Steve Quayle and to discuss the various hot topic issues. I don't think we ever hit the bell as loudly as when we're on with Steve Quayle. I think most people know that. And I could add to that history, by the way, that Chris was telling you about. In fact, what's very interesting is that last year I had been feeling compelled, even waking up, dreaming about writing this book on Petrus Romanus. And if you've read my book, Apollyon Rising 2012, I only gave one paragraph in one chapter to just mention the fact that this was another one of those things that seemed dated to the year 2012, because at that time I wasn't convinced, that there was anything significant really to it. But there was something happening, and I just can't tell you unless it was just directly an unction from God. This just started coming to me, and I started talking to my wife, my son. We were traveling at the time last year, and I was speaking at these different conferences, and we had gone to the Strategic Perspectives Conference in Idaho, where I spoke for Chuck Missler's event. And during that event, when I wasn't speaking, I was visiting with my son and my wife about this, and decided that I was going to begin doing research and write this book on Petrus Romanus. And I have to tell you, we had that conversation, and it was not 1 hour later, Steve, when I went into my hotel room, and I thought while I was in there I'd check my email, and I had an email from Chris Putnam, who I had grown to respect as a theologian and an apologist over the last couple of years. And in his email, he was saying, and he and I don't think had talked about this before then, And in his email, he wanted to know if it'd be okay if he used that quote from Apollyon Rising on the prophecy of the popes in a research paper that he was writing, and I couldn't believe it. I emailed him back. I said, you won't believe that just a few moments ago I had decided to write a book about this. Well, anyway, I don't need to go into all the blow-by-blow details, but there did seem to be something very providential about it, and I have to tell you, it's a good thing that God introduced the subject matter that Chris and I would be writing about bite at a time, if you know what I mean, because the truth is, I've never had a project in my life before where it became at one point as concerning to me as this project. And as you know, I mean, I've taken on the Freemasons. I went to Washington, D.C., went right into the house of the temple, met with leaders there that gave me 2 coins to keep me from getting killed by the Freemasons. So I've done a lot of this stuff in the past where, some people might have, been apprehensive to do it, but nothing until we started on this project had me a couple of different times looking over my shoulder wondering if we really should go down this road. And I know Chris felt that way a couple of times too, but we both believe that God has given us what I now believe to be the most important research in my life. Certainly the most urgent message that I've ever personally delivered. A lot of people won't touch this stuff with a 10-foot pole. But anyway, bottom line, let's get to talking about this, because unless people have been buried under a rock around the world, people understand that we've entered 2012 aware now that something is going on at the Vatican. There is a power struggle, and it is boiling to the surface between factions over there inside the Roman Curia, the College of Cardinals. It involves the current Pope, Pope Benedict XVI. It involves his Secretary of State, Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone. And we titled it Petrus Romanus, the Final Pope is Here, because, as Chris said, we have, according to an ancient Catholic prophecy, which seems to be unfolding right on schedule, we have reached a moment when the final Pope, more commonly understood by both Catholic prophets and evangelicals as the false prophet of end times biblical fame that gives rise to the Antichrist, he's here. And if our investigation is correct, we could be within 60 days, 90 days, 120 days of the arrival of that assistant to the man of sin that was predicted thousands of years ago to arrive on this date.
The ritual that I was, and you guys need to understand this, is that the ritual that I was given to give to my sketch artist, and then it was given back to a high-ranking military general that happened to be at this horrid ceremony where there was child sacrifice and the Annunciation. This is, by the way, after the last Pope's death. During his funeral, on the underground Rome labyrinth, and some of the things that were present, including whether people can handle this or not, a live giant. I mean, this was given to me by an active duty general. And guess who was there? Hugo Chavez was there, and he ran out of this ceremony. And when he went to the United Nations, the people, the world rulers, here's what people got to understand. When our Lord Jesus stated that the whole world lies in the evil one, that they were there, and the only man that saw it for what it was Chavez. So the fascinating thing is, what we're talking about, the enthronement of Lucifer, we're talking about child sacrifice, we're talking about the raping of children, and then the slaying of children. It doesn't get any more disgusting. It is a blood sacrifice. It's just like the abortion issue. Abortion is a blood sacrifice to Lucifer. And and I think that people got to understand this. This isn't a quaint intellectualism. This is full-on slaughterism. There's a new word, Tom. Slaughterism, in which these people are invoking all the occult powers that they've been given through their ancestral bloodlines and fallen angels and everything else. And I mean, when people just laugh and say, oh, that stuff's not real, this stuff is very real.
There is so much that is going on right now, today, in the Vatican that is related to the overall conversation when John Paul I was going to report on it, and he died 33 days later. So we're talking about mafioso stuff here, right?
And I said flat out, he was murdered, okay? And, you know, people took me to task. Well, how can you know that? I said, look, when you got the fingerprints, this is something people need to understand. Occultists enjoy announcing what they're going to do. They enjoy telling you what they're going to do. And then they enjoy, as one guy said, shoving it. So the thing is, this is as critical as it gets. And so I'm saying that, Tom and Chris, for the benefit of people saying, well, what is all this Catholic stuff? Let me put that question to you, if you don't mind, Tom, real quick. Chris, what does this all really boil down to in the third secret of Fatima? Can you sum it up? Because, look, you know the denials and, you know, blah, blah, blah. I can tell you this, the third secret of Fatima is real, and it was so not only prophetic but apocalyptic in the revealing of how it all played out. Naturally, if you're being told that you guys are going to usher in the false prophet, you're not going to go out and broadcast that to, you know, 1.3 billion of your followers, or, you know, worldwide. So will you sum up, if you would, Chris Putnam, will you sum up the third secret of Fatima through all your research? And then, Tom, obviously you want to add to it.
Is that it was something that the Catholic Church doesn't want to talk about, and that tells you a lot right there.
Absolutely.
And I think that speaks louder. I mean, everyone has theories about what it is.
When interpreting end times signs, you got to be careful about non-canonical sources, and that could include anything from the novels of Malachi Martin to the writings of famous seers, to Nostradamus, to Edgar Cayce, to Jeannie Dixon, to whatever. But having said that, and I'm approaching it this way because, Chris, of your mentioning that you don't buy the Marian apparitions in the sense that you don't believe Mother Mary is appearing to people at particular points in time and giving them revelations. But I think what you, I, Steve Quayle, all of us would say is that besides divinely appointed Scripture, there have been times when occultic forces also are aware of certain dispensational realities and can make very accurate predictions. And then even God himself, by the way, sometimes uses what we would call unsaved people. That's something that some people, have a hard time wrapping their mind around, but he does do that. He has done that in history. He used Nebuchadnezzar. His dream from the 2nd chapter of Daniel is one of the most central prophecies of all time, one which the most conservative evangelical scholars routinely quote and chart for end-time studies, and that's a prophecy that spans from 600 years before Christ through the second coming of Jesus Christ, and God chose to give that to an arrogant pagan king and then required his holy servant Daniel to interpret it for the narcissistic king. And then, of course, Balaam. Here you got a sorcerer hired by Balak, the Moabite king, who was afraid of the Israelites, and this king sends for the dark wizard Balaam and wants him to prophesy against Israel, and they both live in infamy today, and yet in Numbers 24:17, another of one of the most central prophecies concerning the coming of Christ, in which Balaam prophesied, I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Sheth. And that prophecy was received 1,000 years before Christ from a hostile source, and yet it is one of the most well-respected prophecies concerning the coming of Jesus Christ. So what do we take from this? There are times where it can be, something is either divinely inspired, or it is demonically inspired, or it is God using an unsaved source. Imagine that. Imagine that. But God uses whatever he wants to use, doesn't he? To tell the world what is coming. And I remember, by the way, when I was a pastor, somebody came to me one day and they asked me why God kept using this one person in the church who they didn't feel was as qualified as they were, and the answer came to me instantly. And I said, it's because they're willing to do it. They'll open their mouth and let God speak, and you're not. So we see that God sometimes uses these most unlikely characters, situations, to get his message across. And so now the big question is Was that also true of the Fatima secrets? Now, we don't have to believe it. The point is, deep inside the Vatican, they do believe it. It is a sanctioned prophetic series of utterances that the Church has sanctioned. They have canonized the children who gave those prophecies. They deeply and truly believe it, but there's strong evidence that they have covered up whatever the final prophecy actually is, and we'll talk more about that in a moment if you want to. But the question still goes back to what you said earlier, Chris. Not only would it maybe be true of the Fatima secrets, but the prophecy of the popes. You said a moment ago you could illustrate how accurate the prophecy of the popes has been for at least the last 500 years, something higher than an 80 or 90% success ratio, which is better than any prophets I know today. Where did that come from? Where does that inspiration come from? Is it demonic? Was it divine? That's the question, but no matter what anybody believes in that regard, we've reached the end of this Catholic prophecy, and the very next pope is Petrus Romanus, the final pope on the list. And events around the world right now are developing in support of the idea that the Antichrist and the false prophet are here. And that's what this new book, Petrus Romanus, it's 600 pages and 800 authoritative footnotes, is an investigation and conclusion of that startling fact. And then let me add one last thing, and I apologize. I'm not trying to dominate the conversation. You guys just get me anointed, I guess.
Prophecy is weird. And that's one thing that we have to accept, and that's why it's good to be somewhat flexible in your views about how the end times play out and things like that, because it's not always cut and dry. But one thing with the prophecy of the popes, I mean, the thing that grabs you right off the bat, and that's just undeniable, is that if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, in chapter 17, it talks about the city on 7 hills. The 7 heads or 7 mountains where the woman sit of, and in the mountains, this is Rome. All scholars recognize that he was talking about Rome in chapter 17 and Mystery Babylon, and it gets destroyed. Well, obviously, you look at the prophecy of the popes, and it has this apocalyptic ending on it. In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will nourish the sheep during many tribulations, and when they're finished, the city on 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. And that little codex on the end there, it matches Revelation 17, and that right there is compelling to me, enough to want to look into the prophecy, and because if that's true, then we really are right up against it.
Yeah. Tom, let me interrupt you guys. And this is all good stuff and necessary stuff, but let me just give you a feel for how some people can't separate. Here's one from a guy in Hamburg, Germany. We're not taking questions, but here's the number one thing that people can't understand. Even people that are close to me don't get this. That he said, why do you guys give these people credibility? He's saying 2012 is a Mayan prophecy. I have an answer for these guys. Petrus Romanus is a Catholic prophecy. What's next? Should we look to Nostradamus for answers? No.
Yeah. Well, let me answer.
And I want you guys to deal with that, and then I have an answer for that. Okay.
Well, let me answer first, and then you build on it. Why would we proceed to discuss the prophecy of the popes and other issues related to things like the year 2012, which has been most publicly identified with the end of the Mayan long count calendar precession cycle? The answer is that we are doing this precisely because this book, Petrus Romanus, the final pope is here, is intended to unveil not just what Bible scholars believe about the end times, but also what occultists are convinced of and what they are dedicated to fulfilling. And that goes to the way Washington, D.C. is laid out, the way the Vatican is laid out, the way this next conclave, which will probably be happening maybe even as soon as April, these people are operating from a belief system, and they intend to fulfill ancient prophecies, whether they were inspired by God or not. That's what we're doing. So extra-biblical prophecies by such as the Maya, the Cumae Sibyl, the prophecy of the popes. These things were sometimes astonishingly accurate. Occult power may be providing supernatural perception that is going to lead to a time of great deception. And don't forget that in addition to the examples we gave earlier about Nebuchadnezzar and so on, Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses in the Old Testament. They had supernatural power. The Pythian priestess in the New Testament knew that Paul, Peter, that they were preaching the gospel of Christ. How did she know that? And that God had sent Paul. You have the demons that cried out of the homosexual men in the valley of Gadara to Jesus, "Art thou come hither to torment us before the time?" And that word kairos in Greek means a definite period of time, an awaited epoch. These are all facts that are especially germane to eschatology, to end-time events, that we are approaching a juncture in time, an important moment in time, and it isn't just preachers preaching on Sunday trying to interpret biblical prophecy. There are occultists who are very much devoted and very much inspired by demonic forces that have a plan. And if we don't bring these issues into the light, then the church will just continue going along, like Steve was saying a moment ago, preaching their happy little "send me your money and God will give you $100" sermons, and he that now withholdeth will quit withstanding, and times of darkness can come forward. There is a concatenation of events right now from thousands of years of pagan cultures, all of them pointing to the year 2012. Wouldn't a person even be curious? I am. I'm curious as an evangelical scholar wannabe. I'm curious why there are so many pagan cultures, including our own United States government and our prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, pointing to the year 2012, in which there is going to be the arrival of two men. Did you know that even the Mayan prophets right now are prophesying that the year 2012 will be visited by two great prophets, speakers, whatever you want to put on them, that are going to appear at the conclusion of this calendar? So there's an event horizon. And if you look at the example of the accuracy of the prophecy of the popes,
it's because people, the church, would